Now, it seems to me we can't continue to allow fathers to sort of drift out of their sons' lives.
There's two very important points. I want to come back to the statement you made about fathers have so much of a responsibility towards their children's education that if they don't fulfil it in terms of parents' evenings, well, then they ought to be denied access. Was that one of those statements to create a debate, or is that how far you would actually go in remedying this issue?
I believe it. What I think is that if you don't want to take the responsibility for your child, you don't deserve the rights. I mean, and this is,
what
to me...
What kind of feedback do you get from the black community when you said that?
Everybody agrees. Everybody agrees, but you can't say it publicly because this is washing our dirty linen and all of that. You know, to be a real father, you got to work at it and you've got to commit to it. If we are concerned about these women who have to bring up these boys, help them and all the rest of it, is support them when they say they want the fathers involved.
What were you talking about there? I never can quite make my mind up about as to how much present youth black culture is responsible for underachievement in schools. It's certainly a very popular culture. I mean, all that's about role models, about where you get your self-esteem from, who's looked up to in the community. Is it a problem? Does there need to be a change in culture, or is it just an easy thing to blame for those of us who are not sure of the answer?
Well, it would be easy to blame it. And, you know, let me preface everything by saying, you know, I listen to R&B, I like hip-hop, you know, I watch MTV with my daughters and so on and so forth. That's all fine.
Yeah.
Here's the problem. For white kids, they can adopt the gangster attitude and then walk away from it. Because nobody thinks they're really like that. I mean, it's not convincing. Problem is, if you're black, in this society, if you adopt the gangster outlook and, you know, the style and all the rest of it, it's fine and it's chic and it makes you popular in school. But once you walk outside the school, people start crossing the road because they think, actually, is it just show, or are you really going to mug them? So it has a real impact. And these kids can't walk away from it. That's the problem. They can't walk away from it. And I think it also encourages, within some parts of the black community, the idea that the only authentic way to be, and this is a male thing, the only authentic way to be a black man is in the way it's described in the gangster culture. The problem is that the people that they idolize are thieves, they're violent, they go to jail, they get killed, they don't have any knowledge very much about anything except the economics of drug trading. These people are failures. What we really need is not particularly to suppress, but to offer more options for these kids. To make it okay to be a teacher, and this is, by the way, one of the things I would really love us to do more of.
More black teachers.
More black teachers, more black male teachers.
Yeah.
To be a teacher as to be a musician or an athlete.
Yeah. And one of the things Diane Abbott said, and she said it was one of those things that Diane could say and I couldn't say, but she gave the confidence to perhaps debate it, is this notion perhaps that part of the problem in the past has been liberal white teachers. I think Diane would say they've not been tough enough, they've not had the discipline that's needed. I mean, that's a lot to put on the shoulders of white liberal teachers, and I don't mean to do that, but is there an issue there about working with teachers more about the special needs of black children, special needs of black boys? You, for instance, have gone as far as to suggest, and it's something I've got a lot of, I understand where you're coming from on this, is that one of the things teachers could do is to put black boys in a class of their own.
Well, we think, you know, the expression that we use in the Commission for Racial Equality is the idea of a culture of care. But actually the first thing that teachers need to do is to care for their pupils, and most teachers want that. Now, the key to this is very interesting the way you put the question. You know, Diane could say it, you can't say it. And I entirely understand what you mean by that. But you see, we've got to get past that point. I think that we've got to get out of the place where teachers, whatever their race, can't say things about one ethnic minority group or another because they are afraid of being accused of being racist and so on. And sometimes they will say things which I would say that is, you know, racial slur or what. But we have to be able to say this publicly without
it being a crisis.
Without it being a crisis, because until we do that, we can't talk about the actual problem that any of these people face.
And just come back to the black-only classes again, because I think that's something that teachers are interested in. I mean, I know 20 years ago we were doing girls-only classes as a way to raise standards there. I mean, is that what you mean, or is it got quite a stir when you made the announcement?
Well, as ever, what happens is that I said in terms that I'd seen in the United States the benefits for black boys, and actually it was for girls too, of teaching them in some classes separately.
But not separate schools, for instance?
Not separate schools. No, that would be madness. My point was very simple, that coming back to the point you raised about culture, what's happening on the street, sometimes the way you might want to talk to boys about an issue, whether it's maths or it's, PSHE or whatever, might be different to the way you want to talk to girls about it. And that's pedagogy. That's just a straightforward thing. Now, we don't do that, I think, enough. In spite of the evidence, sometimes it works. And we shy away from it when we are talking about ethnic groups. And all I'm saying is black boys, as do, say, Gypsy and Traveller children, have a particular set of issues and needs. Let's address them for what they are. And let's not pretend that actually it's to do with the fact that they're poor or whatever, because it's missing the point and it's letting them down.
That leads me into the last area I wanted to raise with you, and it's, we need to look at what multiculturalism is, and you've talked about equity and diversity. I mean, maybe that's just a sign of a country growing up and learning to come to terms with its changing nature, but you see that reflected in schools, I think. It's some of the things we've just talked about. Yeah. And that makes it quite difficult for schools to know as to almost what is the right or what is the best thing to do.
So one of the problems about race is that in this country we don't like to talk about it. And we find lots of different ways of not talking about it. And I think the reason is that, after the Powell era, we got so scared that this whole issue of differentness was so frightening that we should just put it in a box, never talk about it. We shouldn't be worried about race. All diversity is basically good, and if only people understood how lovely it was, and we told them how lovely it was, everybody would be happy with it. Well, this is tripe. I mean, it is true that diversity, I think, broadly speaking, is a plus to societies. My point is very simple. On the issue of multiculturalism, what I've said is very straightforward. When we coined the phrase multiculturalism, I was part of that. What we were trying to do is to say you should recognise that we're not a monochrome society. There are different kinds of people, different traditions. And we've got to acknowledge that. That's fine. The problem is when you tip over the balance between recognising difference and start making that more important than equality between citizens. However, the truth is, we've got to learn to live with these kind of differences. And at the moment, we haven't even really got a very good language for it. But we're going to face more and more of it. The United Nations tells us there's nearly 200 million people who live and work outside the country of their birth. That's twice what it was a generation ago. It's going to be more and more now. And they'll come from everywhere, Eastern Europe and so on. And they'll pose new challenges. This process of globalization, of people moving across boundaries, is going to confront us with these difficult questions about how we ensure that everybody gets the best out of the system, and that schools, by the way, play a function of integrating the community rather than separating it. These are really big questions for us to be able to talk about.
I suppose one of the ways in which this debate has changed in recent years, and particularly perhaps in the last 2 to 3 years, in that the debate has been about colour, it's been about ethnicity, and now, particularly with the Muslim community, it's about colour and religion. Does that change the tone of the debate? Is that something that brings another dimension that we need to give more thought to?
Well, it changes it in a particular way. We've done quite a lot of surveying about this, and one of the sort of positive things about the mood of the British people is that whereas people used to be worried about differentness based on colour, now it's It's quite rare, actually. It's not a big deal for British people. Maybe in other parts of Europe it is, but not here. What people more worry about is what they call way of life issues. And I think ways of worshipping, codes of living are very significant. And at the centre of this, though not exclusively is this about them, are Muslims, because there's so many, it's a big world issue and so on.
And where there's more fear around as well.
And there's more, and it's working against an international background where we think of a divided world. But I think actually we can be more optimistic because one of the things is, in this country, we're very good at this.
Yeah, I suppose if we look back over the last half century, we were talking about the progress made by working class people from families who'd not previously gone to university. You now would be talking about the greater equality of opportunity, even though it's not perfect. We talk about race and about ethnicity. Do you think there's more opportunity, we're more equal? Or to some extent, is the disadvantage even more entrenched than it was a couple of decades ago?
Oh, I see, okay. Well, I think you have to say overall we are a more equal society. There's more opportunities for more people. I don't think there can be any question about that. You know, when I went to university, and you went to university, what was it, 5%, 10%?
No, 10%.
Yeah.
10%.
Now we're talking about 40, 45%. The problem that I think we have is that some groups disproportionately are not getting their share of that advantage. You know, all the boats are rising, except the ones which are anchored to the bottom.
That tends to happen in each generation, isn't it? And once you get left behind when your peers go on, I suppose that's what becomes what some sociologists call the underclass, isn't it? Which is far more difficult to actually address.
That's right. And in a way, that's part of our really big difficulty at the moment. We are in the third generation, for example. This is one of the reasons I'm concerned about black boys and what... We're in a third generation or fourth generation now entering of people like me having almost no chance of becoming doctors, lawyers. I tell you, I mean, just very briefly, I recently had my first time I had an operation. I went under general anaesthetic. And the most shocking thing about the whole thing was I'm lying there, like you do in the movies, looking up at the roof with the lights and all that. And this face looms into sight, and it's a black guy. And I'm thinking, actually, what is the porter doing here? And he says, I'm Dr. So-and-so, I'm the anaesthesiologist.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you, my heart leapt. And then he said the most interesting thing. He said, and by the way, you won't remember me, but you gave me my prize at school some years ago at a local school. Now, the fact that I can think that, and it's such a big deal for me, says what a long way we have to go. And I'm optimistic, actually, and this may sound bizarre in this conversation between you and me. The thing I'm most optimistic about is the role of politics. I think actually we can do better, but politics has to lead. And perhaps when people go, oh God, what is he saying now? Why is he, is he just trying to get headlines and so on? I never think about it that way, actually. But what I do think is that we have to be more courageous than we have been in dealing with these issues of race. The distinction I make is between people who say, let's not talk about it, let's not think about it, let's hope it'll go away or right itself, who I think are the people who've kept us in the dark ages, and the people who say, we've got to do something, and we can do something. Let's talk about what we're going to do.
It's been a pleasure to talk about it today. Trevor Phillips, thank you very much.
Great pleasure.